Most tax pros leave a message.
It's Jane. I'm moving on to a TurboTax expert who beat your price. Adam Devine, tell him how I feel.
Hey, tax pro, she's been thinking twice. Best believe TurboTax will beat your price. This is a tax break.
Switch to a TurboTax Live expert and we'll beat what you paid your pro last tax season. Make the switch at TurboTax.com/beatyourprice. TurboTax full service only. Sign up by 12/20/2024 and file by 4/1/2025. Full details at TurboTax.com/beatyourprice.
How is the cattle market faring right now, and how's the meat industry doing? Those are two questions I recently put before the University of Idaho's Phil Bass to get an idea of how the livestock industry is faring across the Northwest and across the country.
Beef demand, every time, Glenn, you and I talk, beef demand is really strong, both nationally and internationally. We've recently had a bit of a hiccup in the stock market, which usually trickles back down into the commodities as well and futures. And so there was a bump at the mercantile exchange and the cattle futures. But I would say we're still very strong as far as value of the beef carcass and beef cattle. Most everybody should be making money, all the way from the seed stock, cow calf, all the way up through the feed yard and including the packers. And I will make a mention to the packers. You know, there was a lot of, you and I have discussed in the past about how the packers were indeed making quite a bit of money there for a short time after the COVID times and situations. But as things had changed and costs of doing business really changed a lot, the packers, very few people follow this, but they were hemorrhaging cash for a while just to keep the lights on in the plants. I think that has found a nice balance now. They're kind of back into kind of more of a neutral stance. And so they understand that it's important to make sure that the cattle that are coming in are being well paid for, beyond just, well cared for, but well paid for. So the cattle producers are definitely in a good position right now to be making money. As far as across the nation, we got to keep an eye on this La Nina that is predicted to come in probably late fall and going well into the winter. And what that means is for us in the Northwest, it's going to be cold. It's going to be snowy. This last winter, we didn't get much snow. We didn't have that reserve of water that we would have liked to have. However, we had kind of a slow start to the growing season. It just stayed cold for a long time up here, never really quite warmed up. And so I think that helped with some of our moisture situations. The pastures were able to be maintained a little bit longer than otherwise. But we're going to go into this La Nina, and so that's where we're going to get those piles of snow, and hopefully that leads to really good pasture conditions this coming summer for the Northwest. That's something else that we need to be very aware of, not just in the Northwest but across the country, is when a La Nina comes in, the central plains become dry, and so the cattle situation out there never really was rebuilt after the last La Nina event that was, don't quote me, but I would say 20 and 21. And so for those who own cattle, and especially cow-calf operators, if you own cattle, you're going to be in good shape if you can maintain those animals and get a good calf crop on the ground. So we should be in pretty good shape in the Northwest. Keep the folks that are raising cattle out in the Central Plains in your thoughts, just because it's probably going to be a bit of a struggle for them going forward. Feed prices have been pretty reasonable, but the cost of doing business is still pretty high with labor and fuel mostly. And so, it's a tangled web that we have to deal with. In the short run, I would say that the Northwest cattle producer should be in pretty good position.
Phil, you and I have had a chance to talk about the sometimes contentious relationship between those producers and the packers. Has that relationship improved in your assessment, or is there still kind of that tension between the two now that maybe prices have regulated a bit?
Yeah, people are people, and that means that people have short memories, and things are good right now for the cattle producer, and nobody ever cries for the packer, unfortunately. And there's some really great feeders out here in the Northwest who if we could ever get them on the show, I'd love to have them kind of give their perspective. But I love asking these guys, what are your thoughts on the Packers? They said, they're business partners. We have to keep a good relationship with them. And, there was a big push to say, well, we just need more processing capacity in this country. And so a number of smaller meat plants were built over the last 3 years. I was very, very hesitant to get on board with anybody who was that excited about these new meat plants, because the reality is that the cattle market changes and the cattle cycle changes and the population changes. And guys, we're at a very, very small cattle population right now. And that just creates more competition in the market, and it makes it harder for the smaller packers to be around. And so I would say that the Packers right now are really in a competitive situation between each other, and there's a lot of opportunities for the cattle producers. But let's all continue to remember that we're all in this together. If the Packers aren't sustainable, then the cattle producers aren't going to be as well. And so I think we found a good balance. The COVID years were just, you want to talk to an economist, and they would tell you that it was just a wild and crazy time. I don't even like looking at the numbers of profits and losses at those times, because they just aren't real. They aren't realistic. And so we're starting to get back into, I would say, a more balanced, more predictable cattle cycle. And let's keep working together, guys. I would say the more progressive cattle producers understand this and are continuing to build those relationships with Packer.
Phil, things are looking pretty good as far as beef consumption here in the United States. How are things looking overseas as far as those markets and their demand for U.S. beef?
Yeah, we're still in a really good spot. If you're reading any of some of the industry publications out there, be aware that other countries, some of our very strong export markets, are starting to have hiccups in their economy right now. That's going to lead to lower value in the exports and possibly just greater curtailment. We're not going to be able to send that stuff over there, and so we need to be aware of that. Thankfully, there's still a lot of great demand in the export market. Domestically, we can't make enough beef right now, and I like to say, the best way to make more money in the beef industry is to just get more cattle on the ground. But as far as the export markets, thankfully, there's still a great outlet for a lot of our byproducts and edible byproducts, livers, hearts, kidneys, things that we just don't eat a lot of here in the United States, but we're able to send to countries that truly appreciate that. But as far as value for our muscle cuts, there's just really strong value right now in the domestic market. And I think that's where a lot of the focus is going to be in the short term. There's a lot of great opportunity out there, and especially here in the Northwest, if we can maintain really good pastures, don't overgraze them, keep the nutrient content in the soil in a good spot, and as kind of a continuation of some of our Beef 101 discussions that we've had, use some of the resources that are available to you out there. Use your extension agents. They have forage sampling equipment. They have soil sampling equipment. They may not be able to pay for it, but knowing what you're working with, you gotta measure things in order to manage them. And so it's just important to keep an eye on your resources that are there. And don't be afraid to reach out to us at the University of Idaho. Let's see how we can be of service to you.
Once again, the University of Idaho's Phil Bass.
Most tax pros leave a message.
It's Jane. I'm moving on to a TurboTax expert who beat your price. Adam Devine, tell him how I feel.
Hey, tax pro, she's been thinking twice. Best believe TurboTax will beat your price. This is a tax break.
Switch to a TurboTax Live expert and we'll beat what you paid your pro last tax season. Make the switch at TurboTax.com/beatyourprice. TurboTax full service only. Sign up by 12/20/2024 and file by 4/1/2025. Full details at TurboTax.com/beatyourprice.